This photograph depicts a section of the forest near the Italian town of Soma Lombardo. Lombardo lies 30 miles northwest of Milan and is a somewhat unremarkable northern Italian town. Yet, in the woods outside the unassuming little place, something truly horrifying happened that would absolutely shock the world for generations to come. One Saturday evening in January of 1998, 19-year-old shop assistant Kiara Marino and her 16-year-old musician boyfriend Fabio Tollis were sharing a few beers in a Soma Lombardo bar named Midnight Pub, which was the center of the city's metal scene. At some point during their evening, they got chatting with a group of metal fans named Andrea Volpe, Nicola Sapone, and Mario Machin. The group then swapped music recommendations and talked about their favorite records until the bar closed, and they were forced to leave. After the throngs of young metalheads spilled into the streets outside, the couple's new friends asked them if they'd like to continue drinking out in the woods that surrounded the town. After hearing how their new friends had brought along a boombox in one of their cars, and how they'd be able to blast metal and drink themselves into a stupor until sunrise, the couple accepted. Then, after piling into the small rickety vehicle, they drove off into the night in the direction of the pitch-black forest. Once they were deep in the woods, far from the prying eyes of the devoutly religious local villagers, the group began to engage in a night of pure depravity. As the music blared and the mood became ranchier and ranchier, one member of the group produced a baggie of hard drugs, which were generously shared among the others. Kiara and Fabio were enthralled and intoxicated by how wild and debauched the group was. They were told that what was occurring wasn't so much a party as a drug-fueled occult ritual enacted in the name of Satan himself. Then, just when the couple least expected it, one of their new friends pulled out a knife, then launched at a horrified Kiara, slashing and stabbing in a wild frenzy of narcotic-fueled violence. Fabio did everything in his power to defend his terrified girlfriend, but he was quickly overpowered, dragged to the forest floor, and beaten to death with a claw hammer. Kiara tried to run, but it was no good. The group quickly caught up with her, violated her, then subjected her to the same grisly fate as her boyfriend. Once the couple were dead, the trio of Satan worshippers who referred to themselves as the Beasts of Satan dug a shallow shared grave for the couple, then filled it in as they carried on blaring metal and taking drugs. Once it was filled, the boys began dancing on the grave, willing Satan to resurrect the couple as the living dead. "Now you're both zombies. Try to get out of this hole if you dare," one of them screamed as the others broke into a chorus of sickening laughter. After that, the boys continued drinking and blasting music until the sun finally peeked over the horizon. Then once it did, they drove back home and slept like babies. After Kiara and Fabio's parents reported their children missing, the local police came to the conclusion that the couple had simply eloped to continue their love affair away from the interference of their families. Yet Fabio's father, Meek, refused to accept this explanation, and over the years that followed, he began putting together an intelligence file in the activities of those he suspected were guilty of his son's murder. Officially speaking, the Beasts of Satan's third murder occurred in January of 2004, but between then and 1996 it's suspected but not proven that they were involved in a plethora of other killings. On November 14, 1996, a 23-year-old construction worker named Christian Frigerio went missing from his home in Bulgaria. His disappearance was never solved, but the fact that he was a former member of the self-proclaimed Beasts of Satan gives us a good idea of who might have been responsible for him vanishing. A few years later, a 21-year-old former friend of Andrea Volpe was found hanged in the school he had attended on May 7 of 1999. The police claimed that Andrea Bollerin's death had been them taking their own life, but a number of inconsistencies suggested that the so-called taking of their own life may have been staged. A few months after the hanging, 28-year-old gravedigger Angelo Lombardo was found burned alive in the Lano cemetery he was employed at. No one was properly held accountable for his death, but he was the second former member of the Beasts of Satan to disappear or die under mysterious circumstances in just a few years. The following year-old Doriano Mola was found hanged in the woods near Cavaria Crimso, a town just a few miles away from Soma Lombardo. His death bore all the same strange signs of foul play that Andrea Bollerin's had, yet the police simply dismissed the case as nothing more than them tragically taking their own lives. 4 years later, 21-year-old flower seller Luca Colombo was found hanged in Legnano, and it was common knowledge that he was an associate of the Beast of Satan member Nicholas Saponi. The third mysterious death was followed by the horrific murder of 18-year-old carpenter Alberto Scaramosino, who was found burned in his car in the woods near Aronate on May 23, 2004. Yet, while the police seemed either unwilling or unable to solve any of these deaths, Mick Tollis had observed the strange similarities between them and noted with grim fascination that some seemed to be intimately connected to the group he believed had killed his son. Finally, in January of 2004, 27-year-old shop assistant Marangela Pizzota was shot in the throat and later buried alive in the town of Golasica, a place only a short drive away from Soma Lombardo. When it was discovered she was the ex-girlfriend of Beast of Satan ring leader Andrea Volpe, he was promptly arrested, and due to suffering from heroin withdrawals in police custody, it was relatively easy to force a confession out of him. Volpe spilled his guts to 2 homicide detectives, explaining how he lured Pizzota to her death under the guise of a friendly dinner, having already decided her fate due to her knowing too much about Fabio and Kiara's murders. Andrea Volpe then described how after an intense argument, he had shot Pizzota in the throat before summoning Nicholas Saponi to help him dispose of her body. And as they were doing so, they discovered that although she was in absolute agony, Pizzota was actually still alive. After hitting her several times with a heavy spade, the pair attempted to hide the dying girl's body in the greenhouse of one of their girlfriend's parents' homes, burying her alive in the process. After committing such a heinous act of murder, Volpe injected a powerful cocktail of cocaine and heroin, then decided to get rid of Pizzota's car by driving it into a nearby river. Yet, on the way to do so, his state of intoxication caused a car crash, meaning he was an easy target for arrest. Volpe went on to confess to the only murders the police could actually pin on him, the murders of Fabio Tollis and Kiara Marino, and led the police to the spot that he'd helped bury their bodies so many years before. After hearing of Volpe's arrest and confession, Michael Tollis approached the detectives and offered them the intelligence file he had put together over the past 6 years. This seemed to confirm the existence of the Beast of Satan and led to the arrest of its third member, Mario Machin, who presented himself as the psychic medium of the group. Machin claimed that Fabio was one of his best friends at the time of his death, and that Andrea Volpe had threatened him into taking part in the murder under pain of death. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that the Beasts of Satan had started out as little more than a heavy metal band. But as time went on, they had become less interested in making music and far more interested in satanic ritual murder. This was how it was discovered that the group's drummer, Andrea Bontad, had taken his own life right around the same time they made the transition from music to Satan worship, and it was believed that his former bandmates had either talked him into doing so or staged his murder as a car crash to absolve themselves of any suspicion. At the conclusion of his multiple murder trial on February 22 of 2005, Andrea Volpe was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Mario Machin had also confessed to the murders, but was somehow cleared of all charges due to his secondary role in the crimes. The reactions of the victims' families were mixed to say the least. Michaelis was quoted as saying, "Today, justice rewarded me," but Lena Marino, mother of the slain Kiara, was outraged at the relatively light sentences that Volpe had received. She told a crowd of gathered journalists, "It's not fair. They're murderers. I don't care if they cooperated. They took my daughter away from me, and they should have their own lives taken away." 5 more of the group's associates went to trial in June of 2005, and each were sentenced to long prison terms over the following year. Nicola Sapone was somehow painted as the leader of the group, after Andrea Volpe had told police that it was Nicola, not he, that was the mastermind behind the killings. As a result, he received a life sentence, and the 4 other Satanists he went to trial with received between 24 and 26 years for their roles in the 3 confirmed murders. In the aftermath of the group's conviction and sentencing, there was a growing concern in Italy that Satanism and the occult were becoming increasingly attractive to Italian youth. Public outrage was such that during the bulk of the trials, a Catholic university connected to the Vatican began offering 2-month courses on diabolical possession and exorcism for those who wanted to know more about such a phenomena. One priest by the name of Don Aldo Buey called for death metal to be banned, claiming that if music makes itself an instrument of nefarious deeds and death, it should be stopped. The Italian police then announced their intention to create a special task force which would focus solely on the occult, particularly Satanists and other violent ritualistic groups. They would coordinate nationwide investigations into potentially dangerous new religious movements and plan to include not only qualified psychologists but also a priest who claimed to be an expert on the occult. Incredibly, Andrea Volpe was released from prison in 2020 after serving just half of his sentence, and he is currently studying the science of education at an unnamed Italian university. It seems deeply appalling that someone who inflicted such cruelty on people is probably destined to work with children in the future, but the prospect raises profound questions on the nature of redemption and forgiveness. It's entirely possible that Andrea Volpe had completely reformed himself, and that 15 years in prison was enough time for him to strongly reconsider his stance on many of life's deeper questions. But then again, maybe he's just carefully placing himself in a position to commit even worse crimes against those that are even more innocent and defenseless than his original victims. Hey friends, thanks so much for watching. Just a quick heads up, I release new videos every second Monday at 7:00 p.m. EST. Also, check out my main channel, Let's Read, where you can hear longer compilations of interesting stories just like these. And if you prefer audio only, feel free to check out the Let's Read podcast located anywhere you listen to podcasts, all linked in the description below. Thanks so much friends, and I'll see you in the next one.